We're going to go to our next question. It's a video from Dr. Anya Neistat from Amnesty International in London.
For the last 15 years, I worked in conflict and crisis areas, including Syria and Afghanistan and Chechnya and Yemen. And I've seen a lot of suffering that people are subjected to in these places. I was recently in Nauru, and I have to say that the situation for refugees there is one of the worst I've seen in my life. Now that the whole world essentially knows about the devastating effect that this policy has on physical and mental health of people in Nauru and Manus, we all know about suicides, attempted suicides, self-immolations, self-harms, the incidents that are daily occurrence in those places. So the question is, does the success of this policy depend on subjecting people to these enormous levels of suffering and essentially keeping them hostages in Nauru and in Manus Island?
Well, Jim, I'll go back to you straight away.
Thank you. I haven't been to Nauru. I have been to Manus, and I've been to refugee camps all over the world, and I am absolutely astonished at that. If you go to, I have seen enough information to convince me that if you go to Nauru, you will find the most extraordinary medical facilities that most Australian towns would give their right arm for. Anna may have seen terrible things throughout the world. If I compare it to Manus, we are so far ahead of refugee camps throughout the world compared to Manus Island that it's not funny. So I challenge what Anna said.
Shen.
Well, I think the best response is actually of the corporations who were tasked with running these camps. Now, currently at this present time, even though they stand to make millions, Jim, millions, as you well know, from running these camps, every single corporation is pulled out. And do you know why? Because they can't stomach it anymore. And because if they keep in those camps, as we well know, as I talk to every single major bank across the world who are funding these companies, they all said to us, the evidence is overwhelming. So you might believe, not having seen Nauru, what you believe, but unfortunately, and in the kind of conversation that we can have with banks, the evidence is overwhelming. And let me tell you...
Sorry, I think we should just let the conversation unfold. Sorry, no, I'm talking to the audience.
Oh, right, sorry.
Let me make one comment, and that is that what we've seen with the companies is very, very interesting. Your perception is that they're so disgusted with the whole thing, perhaps the pressure that you put on them forced them to leave.
But well, it may have, but you know what?
Yes.
What kind of pressure is that? Stacking an entire stack of reports from every single international organisation, from doctors, from nurses, from teachers, from whistleblowers across the board on the table. If that's pressure, then I think what we're talking about here is pressure coming from real evidence and real facts. And do you know what, Jim? I enjoyed those conversations. Do you know why? Because sitting across the table and having a discussion about facts and policy and evidence is far preferable than the discussion we're having, which is largely about slogans and rhetoric. There are alternatives.
OK. They need to applaud every statement that you enjoy.
Thank you,
otherwise
Tony.
we'll be applauding all night.
I don't see the holding of people on Manus and Nauru is not the issue. And I've never met, as I said before, I've never met anyone in our system who wants to hold them there for 1 second longer. I think, when's the last one finished? In 2018? Who knows what happens between now and 2018. Perhaps there will be no need for either of the two islands to be functional by 2018.
Let's go to the other side of the panel, and I'll go back to you, Hugh, and I'm just wondering, your reflection, you didn't spend a long time at all in camps. Could you imagine doing that? In fact, the situation of being indefinitely... Well,
I was just listening to that exchange, and you know, what dawned on me is the quality of a camp is not necessarily measured by whether it's medical facilities or what have you. It's actually the sense of hope and direction that comes out of it. So you could be in a 5-star luxury hotel, but if you feel like you're locked in and you're not going anywhere and you have no idea when you'll leave, I think the despair and the depression that would be associated with that would far outweigh living in a camp that I can recall in Jakarta, where there was no real infrastructure that I can sort of really call. You know, we'd go out hunting toads and frogs at night time to cook in meals, but it was a sense of hope. We knew that within weeks and months we were being processed, and we knew where we were going, and that was worth more than anything, relative to the physical comforts that a camp might produce.
So just to reflect on that, living indefinitely without hope of coming to the country you were aiming for, what effect would that have?
I couldn't imagine the trauma that would come with that, Tony. I think we had dealt with some significant trauma in making a decision to leave Vietnam, to get on the boat, to navigate certain waters. But the thing that kept us going was this sense of hope and being able to restart our life in a safe country or with safe haven. And particularly for the adults on the boat, and for them, and I could see the anxiety that Mum and Dad were going through. So to end up in a place like the camps that were described here, with no prospect of any future, I think would be
Hugh, that's not true, because these good people have a choice. If they're refugees, they have the choice of making a life in Nauru or PNG or some other country. The only choice they don't have is to come to Australia. If they're not refugees,
do you know of any other country that's prepared to take them?
Cambodia. They're just not prepared to go.
Well, for good reason.
Well,
there's a very good reason why of those who've gone there.
One of the very good reasons why is because of an error that was made, in my humble view, during the Howard years, when people from Nauru and Manus were finally allowed to come to Australia. That's fine, except it gives hope to each and every person who's on Nauru and Manus now that if they don't take the options that are there, and they have options, if they don't take those options, then the Aussies will weaken and they'll get to Australia.
All right.